Hello and welcome to Talking General Practice, the podcast from GP Online. I'm Emma Bauer, the editor of GP Online. Today on the podcast, I'm speaking to Dr Katie Bramall, the chair of the BMA's England GP committee, as she announces that she will not be running for re-election after 3 years in the role. In this conversation, Katie reflects on an extraordinary 3 years for general practice, including navigating challenging GP contract negotiations during a tight financial climate and leading historic collective action by the profession. She explains the personal and organisational reasons behind her decision to pass on the baton and how she managed the intense internal and external challenges facing the committee. She also outlines what her departure means for the ongoing dispute with the government, updates us on the next phases of collective action, and shares her advice for her successor as well as her hopes for the future of general practice. GP Online has joined forces with 5 essential healthcare resources to create the MIMS Healthcare Network. Since 1959, our Haymarket healthcare titles have supported primary and secondary care audience across the UK through individual publications and specialist events. We're now entering an exciting new era with the launch of MIMS Healthcare Network, linking together our 6 leading media brands to serve the entire healthcare community as one. The MIMS Healthcare Network covers GP Online, GP Business, MIMS, MIMS Learning Live and MIMS Pharma. By bringing together these resources, we aim to provide a seamless experience for all healthcare professionals and the organisations that support and supply the UK health sector. The MIMS Healthcare Network, covering every aspect of primary care. For more information about our subscriptions, visit GPonline.com/subscribe. I'm really pleased to be joined on the podcast now by someone who needs no introduction. It's Dr Katie Bramall, who's the chair of the BMA's GP committee in England. Thanks for coming on the podcast again, Katie.
It's really lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
You've got some quite big news. You've decided not to run again to be chair of the BMA GP committee. Why did you come to that decision?
Well, I think 3 years feels like the right amount of time. It's been an extraordinary period for general practice and for GPC England, to be honest with you. We've faced successive contract negotiations. We've organised the first and the second ever collective action by GPs ever since the undated resignations back in 1965. We've produced an enormous amount of practical guidance for practices and developed a really sound long-term vision for what general practice should become. My intention was always to serve 3 years, to give it absolutely everything I've got. And for me, leadership's never really been about titles or building an empire or staying comfortable or holding on to a position for its own sake. It's got to be about making the greatest impact you can for the profession whilst you've got the privilege of serving, and to then have the confidence to hand over to somebody else. As a committee, we're in a strong position now. We've got experienced members, we've got clear priorities, we've got a profession that is a lot more engaged than when I first became elected 3 years ago. I think it's healthy for organisations to renew. I'm proud to leave some strong foundations in place. And I think what publicly people might see the negotiating, they'll see media work, they'll see some of the campaigns maybe. But I think what's much less visible is the amount of organisational leadership that sits behind it. And like any large organisation, the BMA has gone through significant change over recent years. There have been times when leading effectively has meant navigating internal challenges as well as external ones. And so I'm pleased that quite a few of those issues have been recognised and they're being addressed, but inevitably they've shaped the experience of anybody in a senior elected role. But there's another reason too, and throughout the past 3 years, I've always been very conscious that I've effectively been on loan from all the GPs and practices across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. They've very generously lent me to national negotiations at a time when they were facing exactly the same pressures as colleagues across the country. So I've never really forgotten where I've come from, and I've got a real deep loyalty to them. LMC work has always been my passion. Prior to chairing GPC England, I was the chair of the UK Conference of LMCs. It's where I've spent most of my professional life. It's bread and butter for me. And I honestly think that a lot of the solutions to the challenges facing the NHS are going to increasingly come through strong local leadership, integrated neighbourhood working, relationships built within local systems. There's a lot of opportunity there, and I'm quite keen to get stuck into ICB Central East across Cambridgeshire, Hertfordshire and Bedfordshire. But I'm also really lucky that I've had an outstanding team at CAMS LMC in Duxford, a wonderfully supportive chair in Diana Hunter and board, and they've backed me throughout these past 3 years where it's been really tricky, where they've also carried more than their fair share of workload to allow me to do this role. And I suspect I've tested their patience enough, and it's time for me to repay that support. So it isn't me stepping away from national work altogether. I've been elected onto the next iteration of BMA Council, so I'm going to contribute to the wider direction of the BMA and advocating for the profession nationally. And I think really for me, it's about where I can make the biggest contribution rather than leaving the field. I think my long-standing identity has always been LMC first and national second. So I very much accepted a fixed term responsibility, and I delivered as much as I could given what I set out to do. It's now that chance to step back a bit. And it's as good a juncture as any to pass on the baton, because it is full on. It's 24/7, it's 365, and it's come at a cost. But now is as good a juncture as any to pass it on in really strong shape for a new team to take forward.
You talked there a little bit about internal challenges. When you were on the podcast last time, we talked about people on the committee who didn't necessarily agree with the way you'd approached certain things. How have those internal challenges contributed to your decision to stand down?
Well, I think the challenges are born from practices operating under immense, relentless pressure. And every negotiation has taken place against a backdrop of rising demand, workforce shortages, and huge financial strain. And I think another challenge is balancing those immediate crises with longer term reform and longer term strategy. And I'm not going to be everybody's cup of tea. As I've always said, unity is our greatest strength, and relationships matter so much. But we are incredibly diverse as a profession. Partners, salaried GPs, locums, registrars, newly qualified GPs, we all experience the pressures of the system slightly differently. I personally think that unites us is far greater than that which divides us. I think everybody wants enough time with patients. Everybody wants to feel they have a safe and sustainable workload. Everybody wants a career that is fulfilling, and they want a thriving profession. And I think the job of GPC England is to identify those shared interests and to build policy around them. And I think if we become divided, it's much harder to persuade government to listen to us. It's much easier to play us off. And what we really want to do, and we need to do, is be acutely single-minded around driving investment into general practice. So unity for me isn't pretending everybody's agreeing on everything and skipping around happily. It's about recognising our common purpose and recognising our collective risk if we try and diversify away from our collective ambition too much. You've got a minority, but a reasonable chunk of the committee who feel very passionately about the voice of partners and protecting partners above all else. And I think, as I've said, that the committee's job is to negotiate the contract. So that has to work. It doesn't need to be choosing partners or choosing sessional GPs. I think that's an artificial argument, but it's one that some are keen to have and are keen to push to the forefront. There are many challenges, but I hope that whatever happens, people will look back and go, she worked really hard and she tried her best. I would have loved a more generous fiscal environment that wasn't so economically challenging. I would have loved fewer geopolitical crises and a more stable government to work with. I would have loved there to be straighter lines of governance around what we committed to and then what we delivered and what we saw when working with government. My ambition when I started was to do the very best I could to build up a factual, evidence based narrative as to why general practice requires so much emergency investment and to try and secure a new contract, which is what LMC Conference wanted. And getting that commitment in writing from government was part of the journey, but it's all about the delivery. And you can't make everything happen yourself. You are always enthralled to the government. It's only the government that's got the key to open that door. And their timelines, their budgets are going to define everything. And in the meantime, we have to keep a solid, hard, fast, single line of the profession. We've seen a lot of that try and break away and have lots of different narratives, which I think aren't helpful, but they're completely understandable in terms of the pressures facing practices. And I think we all want the same thing at the end of the day.
You talked about internal challenges that are being addressed now. What were those?
There've been complaints, there've been articles put in the media alleging that there are toxic environments and that's why people have had to walk away, when in actual fact the reasons for departures were very different. You know, a little bit of truth and light has been shone on that now in the LMC community, and that's helpful. Also, some of the narratives and tropes that have been pushed out, actually we've been able to shine a light on some of the government practices whereby I think things have been personalised to myself or to Wes Streeting. Well, actually, there's a whole civil service going on behind the scenes, and decisions are not made in isolation, and they're certainly not made on the basis of anything one person might think or one person might say. So I think it's important that we allow, due process to take place. If people aren't happy, then there are options open to them to challenge and to try and seek their truth. You can try and pull it all apart. I'm not here to complain at all. I've been in an immensely privileged position over the past 3 years. I've done the very best I can with the tools that I've been given. I'm really proud of some of the achievements we've been able to get over the line. People said to me when I started, you're never going to be able to get GPs to take collective action. You're never going to get GPs to vote in a referendum. But actually, we've had 3 referenda. We had March 24, where over 19,000 voted over 99%. In the July, the non-statutory ballot saw partners turn out at 68%, which is really good, voting 98.3% to embark on collective action. That was really more than I could have ever imagined or hoped. I was delighted. Just recently, back in March again, another referendum for a very different reason, almost 17,000 GPs, again voting 99%. So I think we've changed that narrative that you can act collectively in general practice. It requires effort and work and nuance because we're all different in our different spheres of what's locally commissioned or what's nationally commissioned and what different people's contracts look like. But it's hard work, but it's absolutely possible. And I've tried to tweak the collective action this time. We did a menu a couple of years ago, and this time it's been monthly, one action, cumulatively. This month, for July, we're going to be looking at shared care, and it is not accepting any new shared care unless there is an appropriately funded locally commissioned agreement. This is some of the changes we've done where we're taking a shades of grey approach rather than black and white. But because of the sheer volume that we have to undertake in general practice that isn't commissioned, the consultants committee know all of this, so it's all been discussed in the round with the wider profession. This is an absolute necessity, and I hope it's going to show incremental alongside last month and looking at what your acute prescriptions are like, looking at the data sharing and the data flows and serving notice on those that may be unlawful, and stepping further, advising patients of their rights for GP data opt-out mechanisms. We're building a narrative, and we've got the Plan B ballot, which will be counselling and seeking advice from the profession over the summer. So certainly I feel it's as good a juncture as any, with a new Secretary of State, new ministers. There are new opportunities to get deals done. And you've got to try and look for that chink of light to do a deal whenever you can. There's no point arguing for argument's sake. So when James Murray was appointed the new Secretary of State on the, 19th of May or something, I wrote to him the same day. I said, look, you've got an opportunity. I don't know how long you're going to be in post, but why don't we try and get something over the line that you'll be remembered for? And I gave the example of access arrangements. And I said, well, look, you can have them open from 8 a.m. till 4 p.m. So you've got 2 4-hour shifts with a handover at midday, which allows really robust access across all types of walk-in, online and telephone. And then that allows a practice 2.5 hours at the end of the working day to focus on urgents via telephones and walk-in, to mop up what needs to be done from administratively, and then the next day you start again. And that will really go down well with the profession. It will be so pragmatic. It will be born out of evidence that you yourself have, government. And it was very much, no, we're not doing that. It would look embarrassing. We can't retract the regulations as they're going through Parliament. It's like, well, being embarrassed to make a change of plan when you're acting on the tangible evidence, that's not embarrassing, that's intelligence. So that is frustrating. Anybody coming in is going to have to be fleet of foot intellectually and able to argue on their feet quickly and look for those opportunities that might arise from any possibility.
What does your departure mean for collective action and the current dispute with the government? Do you think it will make a big shift in direction for the BMA GP committee and its policy approach, or will things just carry on the way they have been?
I would never dare to compel my thoughts onto my successor. I don't think it would mean very much in terms of direction, because it's collective action by its very nature. It's not about one individual. It's about the whole profession. It's always been owned by the profession. We've had the menu in 2024, and I may well have driven some of the choices, strategic choices in this year in terms of the separate months and so on. But the committee supported me in taking every major decision democratically. Indeed, we had the referenda, which have been pretty unequivocal as well. I think at every stage we've asked GPs what they want us to do and acted on that mandate. Whilst the dispute frustratingly still exists because the underlying problems haven't been solved, those challenges don't disappear just because the chair changes. So I think whoever succeeds me is going to inherit a committee that understands both the seriousness of the issues and the importance of trying to work constructively with government where progress is possible. Only governments got permission to get that over the line and to open the door to genuine investment. What's so maddening is to see the machinations of government up close and how powerless everyone feels, right at the top, to change the way the NHS works. And I guess it feels like a behemoth, and with acutes merging, become like that phrase, too big to fail.
Yeah.
I can see the challenges not disappearing anytime soon. Unless, of course, government comes to the table and has a fresh start. And that is a possibility which I would welcome with open arms.
But was there anything you would have liked to have got done over the past 3 years that you've not been able to?
Oh, loads. Loads. What's the phrase? Every political career ends in failure or something like that? I'm really proud that we've got a long-term strategic vision, and we've been able to combine that with practical support and output. So we've got the GP manifesto, our case for investment, published in the first days of the new government. It set out what high quality general practice should look like over the coming decades, rather than just responding to the de facto crises of the day. And I think setting that challenge for the middle of the century of 1 GP per 1,000 patients, alongside academically robust data, so Starfield, Marmot, Pereira Gray, to make continuity of care the cornerstone of our policy, using evidence to drive that urgency to invest. I'm really proud actually of shining a light on facts which are awful, but which are now much more familiar. So that 1 in 4 GP contracts lost since 2010. GMS is 36 pence a day, less than the cost of an apple. We are barely up to our 2015 workforce numbers, but we've got 8 million more patients. 25% of GP estate is older than the NHS. Darzi quoted that. Of the 1.7 million patients that the NHS sees every day, 1.5 million are with us. We produced the value of a GP paper, making the economic, clinical and societal case for investing in expert generalism. We're often seen as a cost, a small cost, but actually we're an amazing investment. Obviously, we've led the campaign for fundamental overhaul of the entire GP contract. We've recognised that incremental change isn't enough if we want to have a sustainable service. I am really proud that other nations took our manifesto, took our safe working guidance, and were able to deliver contractual improvements, specifically in Scotland, with a different government listening. And Samira's work around the safe working guidance was phenomenal, with the elevating it with case studies and examples into the handbook, which the government directly attempted to stymie with its imposed contractual changes. But, alongside the strategic work, we've supported practices through unprecedented changes and challenges. We've got the collective action guidance and the safe working guidance and legal advice, neighbourhood blueprints, template letters, single patient record and the data guidance that we put out in May, practical resources to allow practices to protect patients while protecting themselves. I think we've re-engaged the profession. I think the level of participation in ballots, referenda, and collective action shows that GPs want their voices heard and they're prepared to stand together. And I've founded countless WhatsApp groups. I engage daily on X and Facebook in various GP fora. So I hope I've been accessible, and I hope people have seen output and hard work, because that is, after all, what GPs do. We deliver.
The fact that you put together the case for having, one GP per 1,000 patients as well. I mean, because I think that there's always been this problem with the workforce, isn't it? That we need more GPs. Jeremy helped with this. We need 5,000 more GPs, but do we? How do we need them? Why do we need them? And to actually tie it to kind of patient numbers and say should be the minimum number of GPs we need to look after our population. I think that's a really, it's a really good ambition to aim for. I mean, obviously it'll be a mountain to climb to get there, but it's a really good ambition to aim for.
Well, they said that about Norway and Denmark, and yet they got it down to about 1,200. And I think it's good to have an ambitious target.
Definitely.
Because then you've framed it. Otherwise, you're just throwing a dart at space, and you don't know where it's going to land. I think it's important to nail your colours to the mast, because actually what that tells you is, imagine for a moment having 1,000 patients. Imagine knowing all about them. Imagine the depth of preventative care, vaccinations, screening. Imagine the effect and the impact you'd have on that population. It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And even if we manage to get it from 2,300 to 1,500, wow, that would be, it would make it unrecognisable to what it is today.
Yeah. What have you enjoyed most about the role?
Oh, without question, it's been meeting GPs across England. I love the road shows. I've loved speaking at conferences. I like meeting people. People have been ever so kind, or if they've not been happy, they've been polite enough not to tell me. I've been to see practices in every type of community. I've spoken to hundreds, if not over 1,000 GPs. I've seen extraordinary professionalism despite incredibly difficult circumstances. I've really enjoyed building consensus. We are a broad church, but I think that should be celebrated. All the different geographies, coastal GPs, student GPs, deep end GPs, dispensing rural GPs, different career stages, and talking to GPs right at the start and GPs who've already finished and are telling you their wisdom as well. People have been exceptionally kind. I think they wanted me to succeed. I don't think we necessarily have succeeded in delivering a new contract, but we're halfway there. But I think we've got to bringing those perspectives together into coherent policy. I think that's what's been challenging but massively rewarding. So having ideas that you've then seen taken on board and actually put into practice has been brilliant. This sounds trite, but it has genuinely been an extraordinary privilege.
Do you have any regrets? Is there anything you wish you'd done differently over the last 3 years?
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, the rising demand, the shortage of workforce, underemployed GPs, we raised it as early as we could in like August 2023. But the problem is when you're saying your truth, but people aren't listening or they're not believing, and then nothing changes, that's enormously frustrating. Or when your counterparts in government say, yeah, we agree, we'd love to do this too, but we don't have the budget. And I think I underestimated the frustrations that some of my NHS England and DH counterparts had, and I gave them a pretty tough time the first couple of years. And then the penny dropped a bit more when we went through the comprehensive spending review of Treasury and the autumn statement, and we started to understand and see more about how things worked. And we worked to get some expert negotiation in from civil servants who'd worked in both the Department of Health and the Treasury to give us that little bit of guidance around how these things work. And that was really eye-opening about how frustrating it is. It's not simply about making a brilliant argument and case for it. It's also about relentless lobbying at every level in Parliament, the Commons, the Lords, charities, royal colleges, acute trusts, organisations you've never heard of. If I could multiply by 100 my workforce able to support me in doing that, we may have had a bit of a chance. But when you're just one person in one room with one discussion, it's very difficult to replicate the scale that the acutes, the pharmaceutical lobby can bring, and all of the contract sizes that go alongside acute care. So it really is, as I've said for many years, a David and Goliath scenario. So I've learned a lot. It's easy to spend all of your time trying to firefight and to argue and to point out how unfair it is. It's much harder to keep positive and to be relentless in making the case for the future model of general practice at the same time. And I think, when we tentatively did a deal with the 25-26 contract, at least to begin with, it was trying to shift everyone's mindset into creative, positive policy and collaboration. And I think for a lot of people, they've been so trapped in fighting for years and years and years. It's a difficult thing to pivot. And you can understand that, but you really do have to try and stretch the old grey matter into different ways of thinking to try and see what else can be gleaned.
As part of that for initial agreement, the government did agree to a significant overhaul of the GP contract before the end of this Parliament, but there's not really been any sign of any progress on that at all. Do you think this big new contract's going to happen?
Having the first agreed contract after several years of dispute was genuinely significant. There were some Cassandras in the wilderness saying this is the worst contract we've ever had. A lot of GPs I've spoken to over the past year, 18 months have said, we've seen a significant uplift. It's made our lives significantly easier. And now we're having a lot more flexibility to recruit additional GPs. This is great. But of course, alongside that is a complete absence of any clarity around estates and infrastructure and premises. And also the long-term workforce plan, which we had in 2023, but which then has been scrubbed and then they're going to do a new one. There was a leak to, I think it was the Financial Times, I can't remember, where I think general practice will be a winner, but it's difficult to define anyone as a winner if we're looking at really scaling back the workforce and hoping that AI is going to fix everything for us, because it isn't. We were never going to be able to reverse 15 years of underinvestment, but we did get it back up quite a considerable amount. But the pressures that face us are still there and they remain immense. And the pace of change hasn't matched the scale of the challenge. And we have continued to try to negotiate in good faith. What else can you do? The government holds all the cards. But I think we've been honest when progress has not been sufficient. All we have done is try to be as honest as we can be, because I think that's so important when you're in our position as GPs in the public eye. You've got a responsibility to uphold all those Nolan principles of public life.
negotiating a big new contract, that takes a number of years. It's not something you can do in the normal round of annual contract updates, is it? Is it likely to happen before the next general election?
It needs to happen. The current contract just wasn't designed for modern general practice of 2026. It's changed enormously. Patient needs have changed, technology's changed, the workforce has changed. I think if we're serious about creating a sustainable NHS, then the contract has got to reflect those realities. Now, whether it happens is ultimately going to depend on political will. It will depend on the priorities of Andy Burnham, who he puts in as Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, what those ministers are like, what their priorities are. I think the profession has certainly done the work to show what reform should look like. We are very much ready to go in terms of what we want to see and timelines and scope. I think the Department of Health and NHS England are also keen, but the one thing that we don't know is how much money's in the pocket. Now, it's dangerous to commit to whole-scale reform if you don't know your budget. And Car Hill is a good example of that. Why would you risk the volatility and affecting the viability of so many practices if you find you've actually got the same funding envelope but you're going to change everything? We need to be responsible and we need to know what the budget's going to be. Now, government's been really clear with the comprehensive spending review that funding is frozen until 28-29 of 2.8%. And they might do a little bit more with DDRB, but really not very much, as we've seen. And that's not a generational investment. So we need to see it differently. And I just do not buy that we can make things brilliant through lots of integrated neighbourhood pathways. That's not going to build surgeries fit for the future to house the workforce that we require for the patients that need our care. It needs to be a fundamental rethink and rebalancing of how we address the NHS. Will a government be brave enough to do that? Will the Department of Health continue to put in place the reforms it wants to anyway, with or without us, if we're undertaking collective action? Time will tell, but I think so much is dependent on the priorities of what the new Burnham administration, if it ends up being Andy Burnham today, it looks like it might be, but I know these things can change very quickly. It's all going to depend on political will.
Do you think that change in personnel there could mean better things for general practice, or do you just think that it's all going to be more of the same because of the tight financial constraints we're facing?
God, I really hope it does.
Yeah.
Andy Burnham was only Health Secretary for 9 months at the end of the Brown government. The one thing he did was he did intervene with legislation to make it much harder to have private providers, to make the NHS the preferred provider. He's very passionate about social care and he's very passionate about devolution. You know, I mentioned the opportunities locally in local systems. I think there'll be a much more federated approach than a centralised approach under Burnham. But will he have the time and will he have the capital? And so much of that is going to depend upon inflation, on geopolitical environments. And I hope his local focus and his local authority background will focus his mind on what is achievable on the doorstep when you address things locally, because that's where we can make the most impact in general practice. And you just can't with enormous trusts.
But if you could do something with social care, it would have such a massive impact on the NHS and on general practice.
Completely, but so much of it is funded by private equity groups. How much could be nationalised in terms of a social care service? I think that would pay dividends, but it's going to need upfront investment. And do we have upfront investment capacity right now?
How do you think general practice will look by we get to 2040? Will it still be practice-based and continuity-focused, or do you think, you know, everyone's going to be working in bigger organisations, or will it all still be on the NHS? You know, you talked about that Plan B vote. Then obviously, you know, people are really worried that it's not affordable to run a practice on the NHS the way it is at the minute.
Yeah, and this is it, isn't it? Now, the whole Plan B thing isn't replacing the NHS. It's sitting complementary alongside the NHS. And actually, we put that to government this year. We said, look, you want to make the most of the private sector and you want to squeeze as much private output from trusts as you can. Why don't you let us do the same? If you've got practices that want to open later and treat non-GMS, why don't you let them? Absolutely not, was the response. And I'm like, well, it's kind of cutting off your nose to spite your face, really, because if these guys really want to do it, just let them do it. It's not general practice if it's not fundamentally relationship-based. And it's then just a kind of digital exchange of prescriptions. I think a lot of people who have private general practice often get frustrated that, well, they say just go back to your NHS GP because doesn't really work. I think technology undoubtedly is going to change so much of what we do. AI is obviously going to support a lot of clinical decision making and massive amounts of administration. And I think digital access is going to continue to evolve. We've seen it evolve enormously in 12 months, let alone the past 6 years since the pandemic. But I think the core of what we do is that trusted longitudinal relationship between a patient and their family doctor over many years. And I don't think that needs to be nostalgic or a 20th century model. It's evidence based, it is clinically effective, and it is economically absolutely copper bottom guaranteed to bring you the best return. I feel weirdly optimistic that we remain the most effective and the most efficient part of the NHS, and patients value us enormously. And the challenge, I don't think, is whether we've got a future, it's whether policy makers in government choose to invest in the most efficient part of the health service and whether they can keep it in the health service or not. And I think if they do, the profession has an incredibly bright future. And I think if they don't, we will still find a way to evolve and survive. We've just got to never lose sight of what is the day-to-day reality, that our patients need us and we love meeting their needs where and when we can. It's a joy being in general practice. The misery is when the consultation needs to go outside the consultation room. If I can do everything I need for the patient in front of me, brilliant. If I'm going to have to depend upon a local community trust, elective wait, or another organisation to deliver other things for me, that's when I kind of hold my head in my hands and go, oh God, because it's all going to fall down. Nobody can say they don't know that now because we have made the case repeatedly, clearly, evidence-based. So they just need to do it.
The committee's voting on who will be the new chair next week on the 9th of July, as I understand it. So will they become chair straight away, or is there any handover period?
Yeah, no, they do. So I think standing orders time. There's a chief officer of the association, so it's either the chair of the representative body or the treasurer or the chair of council or the deputy chair. They chair the meeting when it opens, and you have the election for chair, then the election for the 3 deputy chairs, and then you continue the meeting's agenda. Now, we've already written papers for the meeting. We've already set out the agenda and planned it and timed it. I'll be there. I'm not disappearing. I'll be on hand to help guide and steer. It's not the end just yet. I'm still going to be around. There will be a period of formal handover. I think it's about 4 weeks. And it won't be 4 weeks. It'll be, the whole of the next year I will be around to help support the committee. But after that, I shall be off because then I am timed out. I will have spent my maximum time on the committee anyway, according to the very reforms that I called for with Daphne Romney KC back in 2019. So it's just as well. I'm a bit long in the tooth. I've been doing this a long time.
What advice will you be giving your successor during that sort of handover period? Is there anything that you'll tell them?
Yeah, you are there for the profession. This isn't about you. This is not about your needs or what you want to get out of this. This is about the profession. So listen to the profession really carefully. Not always the loudest voices on your committee, but actually the consensus out there of thousands of GPs. It's all about building consensus. It's about being honest with members, even when the news that you've got to give them isn't necessarily the news that they want to hear. Never lose sight of why you are doing this job. Every contract negotiation, every campaign, every difficult conversation is ultimately about trying to get patients access to safe, high-quality general practice and giving GPs the conditions they need to be able to deliver it. I think for me that the past 3 years has almost had 3 phases. There's been the phase of rebuilding the committee's authority and the relationship with the profession. And then it's been a development phase, so developing a strategy and a vision for general practice. Then finally, I think it's been giving GPs the tools and confidence to act collectively, the balance, the referenda, the safe working guidance, collective action resources, the negotiating leverage to try and you actually shine a light on some of what has historically perhaps been hidden depths. I don't think that's necessarily helpful. I think it's best to be really open and transparent. So I wish them all the very best. And there'll be lots of curveballs along the way that they won't have even anticipated. But hopefully they're now able to do it with a strong foundation in place.
What else have you got planned next? Is there anything you've got lined up?
Well, I'm still in surgery and I've got my CAMS LMC, and I'm going to take the summer off to give myself a little bit of time just to compress, get used to a lower cortisol level, get used to my phone not pinging hundreds of times a day and not having to answer and respond to loads and loads of queries all the time. It has been a 7-day-a-week role. And in the course of the next 3 years, my kids will be sitting GCSEs and they'll be needing me a bit more. It's been a really big change the past 3 years. I've been through divorce, I've become a single parent, and I've had a lot of other stuff going on with my family and in my personal life, my own health. So, it's remembering what's important and remembering when it's a good opportunity to hand the baton over to the next person, because it should never be about you. It's got to be about the bigger picture. It's got to be about the profession.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us, Katie, and thank you for speaking so frankly about your time as chair of the GP committee. I think you're going to be quite a hard act to follow.
I'm not disappearing. I'll still be around, sticking my oar in, I'm sure. I'll love to come back and opine on all sorts of stuff and the politics with you without my BMA hat on.
Well, that's it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and thanks again to Katie. I'll be back next week for our regular news review, so please do join me then. In the meantime, don't forget, you can keep up to date with all the latest news and access lots of other resources on our website at GPonline.com.